Hi again then guys, and welcome to another specific car review of a new, on this occasion, free vehicle in Forza 7 of course, the Zakspeed Roush Mustang, an IMSA GT class race car. And of course the Forza franchise has been, especially of late with Forza 6 and now Forza 7, moving much more into having these IMSA style machines, be it GTs or GTPs. You've got the Toyota Eagle, this one, the Porsche 935, a variety of others as well. And although they vary a lot within those kind of categories, be it GT style or prototype style, they do manage to have the same kind of vibe for obvious reasons, that's regulation of course, but they all feel unique. Audi's approach, for instance, with the all-wheel drive, which of course gave them victory. But in the case of this one, it's got an interesting change from some of the other cars. It's very light and it's relatively compact compared to many of them, because these cars are known for being big silhouette style race cars with huge body kits, massive wings, huge power as well. But they're not necessarily the kind of car that you'd think of as being ultra lightweight. They look like they might weigh maybe 1,000, 1,100 kilos, something like that. But in the case of this one, they chose the Fox body Mustang as the base car, or at least that was the car at the time. And that's an interesting choice, because the Fox body Mustang is one of the most physically small Mustangs that they've actually made, especially in terms of length. And in the Forza franchise, we've pretty much always had the road-going version of the SVT Mustang of this era, and it's always been a great car. It's extremely fast in Horizon 3, it's one of the quickest cars in the game. In pretty much every Forza game, it's always a fantastic drag car. But what about as a race car? Because of course you don't have the same kind of advantages, you don't have all-wheel drive, you don't have insane power. You've got a lot, but not quite as much as the road car. So how does it compare? Well, the power is a lot more restrained than you might expect. It looks easily like a 700 or 800 horsepower car. It's actually not, it's 530 with, again, perhaps a surprisingly modest 330 pound-feet of torque. It doesn't have this massive, typical thundering V8 engine that you might expect it to have. It's a turbocharged engine, and it's a lot lighter than a Mustang would typically be. In fact, it weighs less than a modern LMP car, 898 kilos, and consequently the horsepower per tonne is really good. Even without upgrading it at all, you're looking at close to 600 horsepower per metric tonne, which is easily beyond most supercars. That's great for a classic race car in general, and even the price tag of 200 grand is very competitive. That's good value, potentially, at least on paper. So what about in practice? How does it actually perform? Well, as I said, they vary a lot within this category. The Audi, for instance, feels nothing like the Porsche 935, but I would say that this car has some very distinct advantages over its brethren of the time, but potentially some things where it's not quite as strong. No specific downsides as such, it's not bad at anything, but just some ways in which you'll need to drive the car in the right way or use it under the right circumstances to maximise its ability, really. Now, the main advantage I would give it is actually one that I alluded to earlier, and that is its physical size and weight. It's a very compact car for this kind of category, and against cars which are, even in the case of something like the Porsche, which the Porsche 911 isn't that big a car, but it still feels like a big car. This doesn't feel as big as many of the others, and that can help manoeuvrability on tighter circuits, especially city courses, which are really, really tight with 90-degree turns. It's great for that. Now, the disadvantage, I would say, is it's a little bit skittish. Even though it doesn't have a ridiculous amount of power to deal with, the weight is so low and the car is, again, so physically small that it doesn't really have much apart from its downforce grounding the tyres. So when you're not going fast enough to be generating a massive amount of downforce, you feel it quickly. It handles in a similar way to something like a classic sports car or even a classic muscle car when you tune up those, but a road spec one, not a race car. It's got that tail-happy, tyre-shredding kind of tendency to it. It's not ridiculous though, by any means. It's not difficult to drive, I wouldn't say. It's actually quite beginner-friendly, all things considered, for a classic car, but it's not necessarily going to be the fastest thing on the grid. It's a nice free car to have, and it's certainly always cool to have a new addition to the lineup of a game, especially when it's a car like this one, a race car that looks cool, sounds cool. So if you want to give it a try, then sure, but don't expect this one to be, for instance, the strongest of its kind. Something like the Audis, the Porsche, the Mazda. they're going to give it a pretty good run for its money, and although under the right circumstances you could spin this car into a victory, it's not necessarily what I'd recommend as, for instance, the go-to car for this kind of racing. For other people they might feel that that's the case, but at least for my driving style, not so much. But that's it overall for this pick, of course. I'll see you guys next time, and for now, as always, thanks for watching.